Evil. Welcome to Evil Podcast, a horror fiction podcast narrated and produced by Dennis Sarah. On this episode of Evil Podcast, we have two great horror stories for you. We have Rough Draft by G.A. Miller, and we have The Demon's Stare by David Turton. Evil Podcast is made possible by its great listeners. To support Evil Podcast, you can hit subscribe on whatever podcast player you use. You can also rate and review on whatever podcast player you have. If you're so inclined and you listen on Apple Podcasts, certainly hit rate and review there. And for those truly evil listeners, I invite you to become a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/evilpodcast or go to evilpodcast.com directly and hit the Patreon button. You can pledge as little as $1 a month, and believe me, those $1 do add up and allow me to keep the lights on. Or if you'd like, you can set a one-time donation from evilpodcast.com. Now, let's get on with our stories. Our first story is Rough Draft by G.A. Miller. G.A. Miller has a handful of published horror stories and was kind enough to send us the story Rough Draft to be read over Evil Podcast. The peculiar thing about G.A. is he lives in New England. In fact, he lives where Lovecraft lived, and due south where King lives. Perhaps there's something in the water in New England, huh? You can find G.A. Miller online. His website is gamiller.info, and his Twitter handle is gamiller666. I like that. I'll put links to his website, his Twitter, as well as his Facebook page, right into the show notes. So here is Rough Draft by G.A. Miller. When we first bought the house in Carson's Mill, things were great here. Nice area, nice neighbors, close to everything we needed, yet tucked away enough to feel a sense of peace and quiet. Dick lived next to us, and we called him the neighborhood watch. A retired phone company lineman, he was the eyes and ears of the street, and knew pretty much everybody in the city. So we got all the dirt well before the news or papers did. It was a good situation for years, until poor health caught up with Dick. And he had his idiot daughter, Gigi, move in to help take care of him. That's when things started going downhill. Gigi is the archetype of the trailer park drama queen, you see. Short, large, loud, and ugly. She's a proud member of the living in the dole society that is so prevalent in New England. It seems her reason for living is to sit outside for hours at a time, cordless phone cemented on her face, holding court at the pity party line. For reasons I'm not medically qualified to explain, she has a persuasive need to end every third or fourth sentence with a plaintive, "You know what I mean?" Trust me when I tell you, a few hours of this outside your window is enough to fully appreciate why waterboarding is so effective. My nickname for her is Monster. I can't, and frankly don't want to, imagine what is on the other end of those conversations, listening to her droning babble. But then, living on the dole society, right? My tax dollars at work. She was just a minor irritation at first when I spent my working days on the road. But then I had the opportunity to work from home, and things changed. Despite having a full backyard, she likes to sit next to the side door of Dick's house, right next to the trash barrels. She has one of the old aluminum frame web folding lawn chairs from the 60s and is a testament to American engineering. How this chair supports her weight defies all known laws of physics. Yet, there she sits. Unfortunately, her setup is right outside the corner of my home where my office is situated. Even with windows closed, she drones so loudly, every word comes through loud and clear. Mind you, I sit with a headset on, talking to customers through technical problems, trying to solve their issues and get them back up and running. Her endless narrative is bad enough, but when she and her equally hideous daughter Stella, aka Shrek, start a screaming match, cursing each other at high volume, that's when I really get tweaked. I really don't need a call from the boss because the customer was offended by what they heard coming through my microphone. More than once, I've fantasized about strolling casually over the backyard fence with a gun in my hand, shutting them both up for good. A guy can dream, can't he? And then just last week, it occurred to me, I sometimes write short horror stories just for my own enjoyment. Stephen King has nothing to be concerned about. So why not write her into one, and make her demise both horrific and yet perfectly appropriate? Sure, her yammering will still continue, but you can't get a life sentence for imagining things. Well, not just yet anyway. So on a dreary, rainy Saturday morning, I started work on a rough draft. Monday dawned, bright and perfect. The flawless blue sky above, birds jumping around the bushes, chirping away, plants starting to bloom in the early springtime warmth. If only it wasn't a work day, and I didn't have this damn cold. It would be absolutely perfect. I had everything on the computer set up and ready to go for my 7 a.m. start. The first caller had a simple issue, which we resolved easily, and he was thrilled. Everything was looking good until 7:30 when it began. Monster got off to an early start, yammering away on the damn phone of hers right under my window. After the third or fourth, you know what I mean? I was clenching my teeth and gripping my coffee cup almost hard enough to shatter the ceramic handle. I turned to face the screen on my personal laptop and opened the PDF version of the Necronomicon that I had recently obtained, browsing the contents and hoping the translation was accurate. I found what I was looking for and uttered the incantation aloud, ensuring I had muted the microphone on my headset first. After reciting it 3 times, I opened my pocket knife and made a small cut on my fingertip, just enough to draw blood. I allowed exactly 3 drops to fall on the desk, and then popped my finger into my mouth and went to fetch a Band-Aid. Walking back into the office, I heard her saying, "Well, that's when I told her to..." And I looked out my window. She was standing now, arms waving madly as though swatting a swarm of invisible flies. Her eyes were bulging, her skin turning a deep shade of violet, as she tottered on her feet, finally dropping the phone. She seemed to look over toward my window, where I stood, wearing my best Norman Bates smile. I really hoped she could see that smile clearly. Her mouth was wide open, far wider than normal, to accommodate her rapidly swelling tongue. It looked to be the size of a tennis ball now, and still growing. Her bulging eyes rolled back in her head, revealing huge whites behind her glasses, as she fell backwards. That faithful chair finally met its match, the aluminum frame snapping loudly under her falling weight, collapsing beneath her. The arms folded over, trapping her into the broken frame. Her struggles were much weaker now, and finally ended. Her polyester pants turning dark as her bladder and sphincter let go, and her hands dropped lifelessly at her sides. Her tongue was so large at the end, it looked like she was trying to swallow an entire pot roast at once. Her teeth had impaled it, blood trailing from the sides of her mouth, adding to the illusion of degenerate gluttony. Just then, a call came in, so I had to turn away from my screen and pull up the customer's info on the work computer. He explained the problem he was having, and I determined he needed a hands-on service to resolve it. Living in the city, I hear sirens all the time, but these were getting louder, closer. I quickly verified the necessary information and placed the call for the customer, then signed off, removing my headset. I walked into the living room as an ambulance and a fire truck pulled up in front of Dick's house. I went back into the office and looked out the window, fearing he had taken a turn for the worse, but gasped, frozen in place at what I saw outside. Monster was on the ground, exactly as I had imagined her in the story. Her mouth stretched around that enormous tongue looked horribly obscene as the EMTs began taking vitals and trying to revive her. It took both EMTs and the 3 firemen to pry her out of that damaged chair and get her out into the stretcher. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know she'd been pronounced dead from asphyxiation once they got her in the ambulance. She was stone cold dead when they arrived, exactly as she was on my laptop screen. I felt neither joy nor sorrow, pride nor remorse. I felt nothing, actually, except a cold sense of unreality, as though this couldn't possibly be happening. This only happens in books and movies, not for real. Can't possibly be for real. And yet, it was. Right in front of me, right outside my window. I gently closed the lid of my laptop, letting it hibernate, my story still up and active just before the screen went dark. It occurred to me it should be titled Poetic Justice, considering that she lived by the tongue and died by the tongue. I composed an email on my work computer stating that I had to take the rest of the day off, as my cold had compromised my ability to talk to people. I sent that off, then closed out and shut down the work computer, smiling as I thought about how I would take a ride. It was time to enjoy the rest of this beautiful spring day, just bursting with new beginnings. That was Rough Draft by G.A. Miller, our first story. Again, you can find more from G.A. Miller on his website at gamiller.info. G.A. Miller is one word. I'll set links to his website, Facebook, and Twitter in the show notes. Our next story is The Demon Stare by David Turton. He has penned several short stories which have been published in various magazines and anthologies, and has a novel coming out in 2018 called The Malaise. David was born in Yorkshire in the United Kingdom and graduated with a degree in journalism. He now lives by the sea in the northeast of England. You can find him on his website at davidturtonauthor.wordpress.com. His Twitter handle is David Turton. You can also find him on Amazon. Directly go to amazon.com/author/DavidTurtonUK. I will put all those links in our show notes. David was kind enough to submit the story, The Demon Stare. So without further ado, The Demon Stare by David Turton. I opened my eyes, dozy from the night's deep sleep, and looked down, beyond the end of my hospice bed. It's still there. Its shiny face and bright yellow eyes glare back at me. Its bald head gleams under the mellow hospital light, and its wide grin reveals a set of pointed and blackened teeth. I turn my whole body and bury my face in the pillow, letting out a muffled scream into the soft surface. It's been 6 days since that demon appeared. At first, I assumed it was a side effect from the medication, a state of delirium that had come over me as a result of various drugs in my system to combat the pain. I still think that might be the case now. The doctors and nurses seemed to simply pass by the demon, without any thought of wonder or exclamation of its terrible presence. but it's been sitting at the end of my bed for the past 3 days. It hasn't moved, other than the occasional blink of both of its smooth red eyelids, or the slow and steady heaving of its skinny chest as it breathes. Its small, bony body juts out in various directions as it sits in a crouching position, and I can smell it. Holy hell, I can smell it so bad. It smells of death, rancid and earthy. At first I had slept to make it disappear, but the demon had been there still when I awoke. Still the ghastly stench hung in the air, and still the bright eyes stared back into mine. The eyes sit large in the demon's red face. They speak of humor and judgment. The bright yellow almost burning into my eyes, burrowing, seeking, reaching into my soul. "What do you want from me?" I shouted on the first day it appeared. But the demon had simply stared back. Had the eyes flickered? Had the grin widened at my outburst? I think so. The only effect my words had were to alert the nurse, who came running into my room to ask me what I was doing. What was the matter? "Can't you see it?" I asked the nurse. "Can't you see the red devil?" The nurse had turned around to face me, and I could see the look in her eyes, a knowing look of concern. Her calm voice reasoned with me. "Mr. Balmer, I can see you're in some distress. Please calm down. I'll try to get some sleep." "You can't see it. You can't fucking see it," I yelled. Thin strands of white spittle flew from my lips onto the linen hospital bedsheets. The nurse hurried out of the room. When she came back, the doctor was in tow, with a new dosage of drugs to keep me on the level. And now, the demon is still here, staring back at me. I changed my tack, addressing it quietly and watching, looking for a glimmer of recognition, a sign. "What are you here for, demon?" I asked it. I looked deep into its horrible eyes. "Are you here for me, after what I've done?" I stare. Its yellow eyes and elliptical pupils, black and soulless, stare back at me. I hold the demon's stare without blinking. What is its message? Why is it here? I've led a life of sin. As head of security for Steve Ricardo, the biggest and most controversial businessman in southwest London, it came with the territory. His property portfolio is huge, covering various regions across Europe and the Americas, and he has several lucrative sidelines, including restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. Steve Ricardo is also a crook. He takes backhanders, bribes government officials for building projects, and roughs up competitors in every trade he operates in. Steve is a modern-day gangster, and until the day I retired last year, I was in charge of the roughing up. Of course, I'd been winding down for a couple years before that. Crippling stomach pains blighted me for years, and I had gradually grown weaker. It was a blow when I had sat down in front of the doctor, but not a surprise. There's only so many times you can spew and shed blood and think it's a dodgy courier or some kind of god-awful bug. No, I had the feeling it was something serious. Something life-threatening. But it still knocked me sideways when the doctor sat in front of me and told me I had less than 5 years to live. It was an even bigger blow 3 months ago when my stomach seemed to explode from the inside and blood spurted out my mouth and nose uncontrollably. My stomach cancer had reached an advanced stage, and my life expectancy had been squeezed further down. Like sand leaking quickly out of an old egg timer, I was going to die, and sooner than I thought. Has this devil come for me? Or is it a figment of my drug-fueled imagination? An image conjured by my guilty mind as it looks back regretfully on my tainted existence. Maybe I'll never know. Maybe the demon will sit at the bottom of my bed until my last dying breath escapes my miserable, rotten body. Or maybe it's simply waiting for its opportunity to reach up and drag me down to the place reserved for criminals and murderers. Murderers like me. I've killed men, just part of the job. Have I felt sorrow from the killing? Have I lain awake at night, my mind racking over and over, after taking a man away from the world, away from his wife, his children, his mother and father? Once or twice. After the fourth or fifth time, it had been easier. Like anything in life, the more I did it, the easier it became. And these people, had they deserved it, as much as any man deserves death at the hands of another? I think so. They had not been nice men. Ricardo built his empire by taking away people who stood in his way. The same they would have done to him if they had got there first. And Ricardo had thanked me for my work and long service. 5-figure annual bonuses and a 6-figure bonus when I retired. Gold watches and presents for my family for birthdays. When my wife passed away of breast cancer 5 years before I retired, Ricardo had paid for the entire funeral. Had even dedicated his company resources to help it run smoothly. Nothing was a bother. I had killed more than 20 men for Steve Ricardo, but my lord, he had thanked me for it. I haven't seen him in the past 2 months before the demon appeared, but Steve Ricardo's a busy man. He won't have time to see a dying 68-year-old like me. Of course, he'll come and see me eventually, but I don't expect it. Part of me doesn't want him to see me like this. Ricardo had so much respect for my strength. He had seen me crush men in front of him with my bare hands. I appreciate his visits to my deathbed, but I don't want him to remember me like this. I am snapped out of my thoughts by my daughter, who has opened the door of my room. She stands at the end of my bed, right next to the demon. Suddenly, the demon's eyes shift. The demon is still, but its large yellow eyes shift. It's looking up at my daughter. "Susie, watch out." I warn her, but my voice is weak. Be careful, demon." I point down at the grinning form that stands next to her. "Oh, Dad, the nurse said you'd be taking a turn for the worse." She comes to the side of my bed. She walks straight through the demon. Her legs pass right through it like it's a ghost in an old movie. "Dad, you know you're not well," she says as she straightens my pillow and pulls my sheets tight. She takes a seat next to me on the bed. "Dad, can I ask you something?" she asks. "Anything." I choke the words, followed with a blackening cough that draws blood into my handkerchief. "Who was Matt Nightrider?" I put my hand over my mouth and look back at her. My heart thunders. How could she know? How could she possibly know about Matt Nightrider? "Have you been talking to Ricardo?" I ask with considerable effort. She shakes her head. No, I just had a dream. A really vivid dream. So I searched the name on the internet, and he was real. His body was found in 1998 in Wimbledon. He was a gangster. He certainly was. Matt Nightrider, so named because he would drive around in the dark with his lights off to evade police tails on the night roads, used to work for Steve Ricardo. But he had set his sights higher, looking to take his own portion of Ricardo's wealth. He had been dealing behind his boss's back, striking agreements with rival businessmen in the area. Ricardo had been tipped off, and it was up to me to clean up the mess. Ricardo was there, of course. He was always when I cleaned up. This was a particularly brutal one. Nightrider had put up a good fight. We had exchanged blows for a few seconds, and he had wiggled from my grasp a few times, which was no mean feat back then. I was a big man, with arms as thick as breeze blocks. He even pulled a knife and thrust it towards me. That really made me angry. I dodged his attack and grabbed his arm, breaking it in several places with a strong twist of my hands. Screaming in agony, Nightrider had sunk to his knees. I had finished him off by picking the knife up from the floor and dragging a deep cut across the front of his throat, causing thick blood to gush powerfully in several directions. I cut him so deep, I could see the thick ligaments that surrounded his Adam's apple. Before the loss of blood extinguished his life, I punched him hard in the face, knocking several teeth out of his pale face and causing the back of his head to slam against the floor with a loud crunch. I had buried his body in a shallow grave on Wimbledon Common. We had methods to get rid of bodies without them being discovered. But Ricardo wanted to send a message with Knight Rider. He wanted people to know. Dad, are you listening? Who was he? Did you know him? You did in my dream. You were the one who... No, I reply, interrupting her. What was the use of telling the truth to my daughter now? I had little time left. There was no point in digging up the past. I heard the name, but I don't know what happened. All right, it's just a dream. It was pretty brutal. I couldn't get back to sleep afterwards. Then to find out he was a real person, it just made me shiver. Anyway, I've talked to Robbie on the phone, and next Sunday for Mom's birthday, we thought we could all come up. We can even bring the kids, too. What do you think, Dad? I nod. That would be great. And it would be. My son Robbie is a teacher, a good man who lives his life on the right side of the law. And my 2 children have each given me 2 grandchildren. My family are the single best thing in my life. When I eventually die of this horrendous cancer, I hope they are the last thing that crosses my mind. I have never divulged the shadier aspects of my working life with my family. Even my wife, who saw my blood-stained clothes and multiple bruises and injuries, knew very little when she was alive. I have protected my family from the evils of my life, and I'm proud to have done so. They've all grown up to be good people, great citizens. My grandchildren are beautiful and clever. They have great lives ahead of them, and they are coming on Sunday to see me. I can't wait. As my daughter leaves, I sit up. Again, I stare at the demon, its awful grin taunting me. You horrible bastard, go away, I shout. Its eyes flicker, more taunting. More judgment from this devil in the room. That's it. My anger boils up, causing a surge of energy to rise from the base of my spine right up to my brain, as if my blood is boiling inside my body. Shakily, I stand out of bed. It's the first time I've stood since this fucking demon came into my room. My stomach lurches with the effort of standing, and my head, still boiling with rage, spins, causing me to lose balance. I grab on the side of the table to steady myself and look over at the thing at the end of my bed. The new, higher angle affords me a better look at it. I see its elongated feet, 3 large pointed toes. The demon's eyes have followed me, so the elliptical pupils have moved to the top left of its yellow irises. I stagger over, one hand on the wall to keep my balance. I walk so I'm right next to the demon and look down. It's so close now. My heart beats faster and faster in my chest until I can almost feel it rising up towards my throat. The demon's black and yellow eyes are even bigger closer up, and they look up at me, staring right through my soul. I bend down so my face is near the demon. It smells even fouler up close. The rotten smell of death hangs heavy and close, offending every fiber of my old cancer-riddled body. I reach out for the demon, slowly, spreading my fingers. My hand edges closer to the demon's gleaming head. I look in the demon's eyes for panic, but its eyes do not flicker. They simply observe my nearing hand. Its pointed teeth black and awful within its grinning mouth. I push my hand down onto the top of its head, and as quick as I touch it, I'm forced to remove it, as white-hot, searing pain shoots from my hand and fingers up my arm into my brain. It is like I've put my hand on a live electric fence and several thousand volts of electricity are zapping my entire body. I recoil, take a few steps back, and fall onto my bed. My stomach lurches with agony once more. I look back across the bed and the demon grins still, his eyes observing, judging, taunting. The day comes. My whole family stands before me at the end of my hospital bed. The demon stands in front of them, its eyes still staring at me. Every few seconds it looks up and around. It gazes at Robbie and Susie. It stares across at Richie, Louise, Martin, and Chris. And then it directs its evil eyes back in my direction, its awful grin widening. My family brings me presents, flowers, books, magazines. They bring photographs of me and my wife in the older, happier times. I ask the kids about school. I ask Robbie about his job. Conversation isn't exactly flowing, but we're getting by. I know they can't see the demon, and I don't want to make a scene by referencing it again. Robbie turns to me. Dad, who's Sammy Mack? I sigh. Another one. Who's putting this information in their heads? Sammy Mack was another man who stood in the way of Steve Ricardo. I had dangled him off a 40-story skyscraper by his feet before letting him go, causing his body to smash into 1,000 pieces in a messy pool of blood, bone, and brain at the bottom. Who told you? I asked. I got a phone call last night, asking if you were there. I said you weren't, but I'd take a message. He said to say it's Sammy Mack. Then he laughed. It was an awful laugh, like one of those low, evil ones you hear in the movies. Freaked me out. Who is he? I sigh again. I can feel my breath rattle in my chest, causing me to cough up blood. It's too late in my life for lies. I have nothing to lose by telling the truth. I killed him, I tell them. Robbie and Susie look at each other. Susie looks at the children. Dad, not now, please. I killed him, Susie. I dropped him off a high building and then scraped up his remains at the bottom. You were asking the other day about Matt Nyrider? I killed him too. Slit his throat. I used to work for a gangster. Dad, stop it, Robbie says. Kids, go and get some pop and chocolate from the vending machine. The kids go out the door, looking suspiciously back at me, mouths gaping. Dad, I had another dream too. Someone called Norman Milburn. I killed him too. I tied him up in a chair with a thick rope. I hammered nails into his hands and knees and then set him on fire. I watched his face melt and I could smell his flesh cook and burn. Then I put the charred remains into the boot of a car and had it crushed in a scrapyard. Dad, says Susie, crying. I don't know if you're making this up, if you really believe it, but you have to stop. Let's go, Robbie interrupts. He's not ready. It's too much for him. He's not ready. Come on. See you later, Dad. Susie and Robbie walk out the door. I see Robbie put his arm around Susie as she weeps. I lie back in my bed and stare at the ceiling. Did I say too much? Did I scare them? I don't want them to remember me like this. I'll phone them both tomorrow to apologize. I'll tell them I made it up and that the drugs had me confused with some film I'd seen. But why has Susie been having dreams? And why would some idiot prank caller ring Robbie pretending to be Sammy Mack? I look back at the end of the bed. Is the demon's grin even wider? Are his eyes mocking me even more? It's you, I shout. It's you, you bastard. You're going to pay. The nurses rush in and put both hands on my shoulders. Calm down, she says. Calm down or I need to sedate you. Fuck you, I shout at the nurse, at the demon, at life, and the world around me. She presses a button on my bed and another nurse comes in. I feel the sharp prick of a needle in my upper arm, and I immediately feel weaker. Relaxation washes over me as my eyes begin to feel heavy. I glimpse the demon at the end of the bed. It's laughing. I can hear it, deep and evil. I see its red, gleaming finger, scaly and thin, pointing at me. It is pointing at me. It narrows its yellow eyes and opens its mouth to speak. Before I can hear the words, everything becomes black. Are you awake? I jump, opening my eyes wide. It takes my thoughts a few seconds to recalibrate. I'm in the hospital. The man sat looking into my eyes is my doctor. I was given a sedative, which explains my drowsiness. Is it morning? I'm not sure. I have some bad news, some grave news that is not easy to break no matter how I do it. I sit up in my bed and rub my eyes with the backs of both hands. Doctor, what? What are you saying? What is it? There's no easy way to say it, no sugarcoating. For God's sake, doctor, just say it. I shout, shaking off my haze. The doctor took my hand. Your family was killed on the way home from their visit last night. They had a car accident. What happened? I asked. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I told you they had a... No. Tell me what happened. How? Where? I don't think that... I squeezed his hand tightly, digging my fingernails into his skin. Fucking tell me. The car exploded on the bridge on the way home. Please don't know how, but they died instantly, and then... And then what? Then the car went over the bridge into the water. They took them out a few hours ago. They're all dead. I'm sorry. I put my hand over my mouth and cried uncontrollably. Why did they go in one car? Robbie's six-seater, his new one, must have had a fault. It must have had something wrong. I'll leave you to it, but you need anything, please just press the button. I'm so sorry. The doctor stands and leaves my room. Put my hand over my face and weep violently. Saliva pours out of my mouth. It feels like I've lost control over my face and all my chest begins to ache painfully. I stop crying and screw my face up angrily, fire rising up my body. The demon. It was the demon. I'm going to kill it. I don't care about its electricity or its searing heat. I don't care if it kills me. I want to hurt it. My furious thoughts are cut short as I look at the end of the bed. The demon is no longer there. My eyes scan the room. The demon is nowhere to be seen. I turn my body back to the bed and bury my face in the pillow, weeping, screaming, wishing for my family to come back, wishing for the demon to return to the foot of my bed. And that was The Demon Stare by David Turton. Again, you can find David's website at davidturtonauthor.wordpress.com. I'll put links to his website, Twitter, and Amazon page right into the show notes. I hope you enjoyed those stories. I'm collecting submissions for future episodes. You can find past episodes on evilpodcast.com. If you wish to connect with me on Twitter, I'm at Dennis Sarah. On Facebook, I'm at facebook.com/evilpodcast. Again, Evil Podcast is made possible by the support of its evil listeners. If you can, subscribe on whatever podcast player you use. Rate and review as well, if at all possible. If you're truly evil, become a Patreon. Go to patreon.com/evilpodcast. Or go to evilpodcast.com and just hit the Patreon button there. If you'd like, you can make a one-time donation as well. If you'd like to submit a story or want to contact me by email, I'm at mrdenissarah@yahoo.com. That's Mr. Denissarah@yahoo.com. There's also a link on evilpodcast.com for my email. I want to thank you for listening. And remember, be good. Evil Podcast is written, produced, and narrated by Dennis Sarah, and is copyrighted by Dennis Sarah. Intro music is by Kevin MacLeod.